Good morning and welcome to episode 3 of Lost in Translation. Thank you for joining us the last couple of weeks. We had some internet issues last week. I hope we're going to be all right today. So, I'm Jonathan Bell, partner at Red Compass Labs, and I have with me today Mr. Mike Truter, who's head of our digital ecosystem and innovation stream, currently based out in Singapore. So welcome, Mike. And today I'm pleased to welcome one of our very special payments experts and SMEs in Red Compass Labs, Mr. Frederic Barbet, who's joining us from the snowy backdrop of, I think, Belgium today. Welcome, Frederic. Great to have you today. So we're looking at translation services and what that means for your ISO 20022 migration. Is translation services the panacea? Are translation services the panacea that you need for an easy adoption starting in the next year? And we've thought about a few different things. We've thought about taking a long-term holistic view. Don't just look at the short term, but look at the long term as well, and make sure that you plan properly. We've thought a bit about the pitfalls that there are in and around this subject of making sure you don't forget the other systems, the end-to-end flow of the data, etc. And today's strapline is, what lessons can we learn from the three little pigs? The three little pigs, you remember, there was a wolf and there were three little pigs and there were three houses. Some of them worked, some of them stood the test of time or the test of the wolf, and some of them didn't. So we're going to think about that. So Mike, if I could just open up for you, the three little pigs, what's the parallel? What are we talking about?
Well, we've been doing this payments gig for a long time, and I was thinking back to the days when we introduced SEPA. And I've got a little story maybe that I can share, not a fairy tale, but one story that helped us learn a lot of lessons through a journey. And if we think back, I guess, to our house of straw, when SEPA was just coming in and we needed to receive ISO 20022 messages, we didn't have all the systems built that needed to handle them. And we also thought the volumes were going to be really, really low, which they were. And so all we needed to do was build a very simple Excel tool that could translate the ISO 20022 message into fields that the operators could actually input. And that was a perfect tactical measure for low volumes just to make us compliant. But that wasn't enough to really cope. So we built a house of sticks. We decided at that time, early days of outsourcing services, we invoked an outsourced service to kind of handle the next level as well. That gave us limited flexibility, but we could really ramp up our numbers in terms of sending and receiving. So before we could only receive, now we could send through those growing volumes. But the reality was we realized quickly it carried a high per transaction cost, having this overhead of the translation and this external service. And so over the longer term, that really mattered for us because we couldn't really realize all the potential benefits of the new scheme because of this lack of flexibility. And we're a little bit worried about resilience too. Mm-hmm. And so that really led us on to the house of bricks, something that ultimately we implemented as a strategic solution, which was an integrated ISO native payment engine. And although the upfront investment was relatively high compared to those other options, strategically it really made the most sense because it gave us control over stability and resilience of the platform, which is really important. The ability to fully leverage the opportunities of that new scheme as well, which is really important from a product perspective. And it enabled us to optimize our back office processes and really improve STP and the customer experience, including really important things like later cutoff times, improved reliability, and product innovation. And so, that was the journey we went through on SEPA. And, I feel banks are going to go through a very similar journey now using ISO 20022 for high value and cross-border payments. Translation services, depending on how they're adopted, are a great tactical measure, but really are unsustainable over the longer term. And at some point, a migration to native ISO 20022 platforms is just going to be inevitable. So that's the story of the three little pigs.
No, that's helpful. So you tried each of the little pigs' houses, right? You started with the straw, moved on to the sticks, and then you landed on bricks, which is still persisting in that particular global bank, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good parallel. Frederic, just to come to you a second, if that's okay. So if there's different ways to approach it, and many, I think, many of our clients, our friends in the banks will be thinking, let's just get through this first step. But are you going straw, sticks, or bricks? there's lots of custom bespoke things that weave in and around the translation service that we've been thinking about a little in some of these series over the last couple of weeks. What would you advise to handle the complexity around that translator?
For me, I think the first starting point is truly understanding your payments landscape. So truly understand what is currently going on into your system. Now, of course, that's a nice short answer, but the complexity is, of course, is sitting behind it. So what we are, for example, doing with some of our clients is really trying to help them using data analytics, machine learning capabilities to kind of understand, okay, what type of scenarios are happening in your production systems at this point in time for your high value payments. So what type of payments are your correspondents sending in? What type of payments are your customers sending in, and how are they using the messages, and what type of fields are they populating in that? And that allows you to understand what unique scenarios are happening in your production system, and also at what point in time you can, for example, go for a more tactical solution, and at what point in time you definitely will need to migrate towards a more strategic solution where you then indeed go ISO native.
Right, yeah, okay. So the different options, right, as well. And obviously we're geographically spread. So I'm in the glorious city of London in the late summer sunshine. Mike's there in Singapore and Frederick's there in Europe, over in Belgium. There's different timetables, right, in different places. So the same, not every bank around the world is facing the same sequence and requirement that they need to reach. So there's always something bespoke, I think, in how you apply it at your specific bank. I think that's absolutely right. Just one question that strikes me. So we've thought about, sorry, go ahead, Frederick, go ahead.
Maybe to add to it, because I think it's a very valid point. If you, for example, look at CHAPS, so the banks in the UK, if you look at what the Bank of England wants to do, they really want to accelerate the migration and not only go for like, but soon afterwards also implement new data rules. And that also means that inevitable, all the banks within the UK, they will also need to migrate faster and potentially will need to go for a kind of a longer term solution, because otherwise they will not be able to meet the data requirements from the Bank of England. And I think it's a very valid point that every bank really needs to look at their migration path, and that they need to also understand at what point in time they need to move towards the next stage just to meet the regulatory requirements.
Right.
Yeah. Could I jump in there as well and just add? I think different banks, depending on the role they play in different markets, the scale of those markets for them, the importance of those markets, also, will make decisions differently. If it's their core market and the one where they really need to be at the forefront with the latest, greatest product and the ability to innovate, there's a lot more pressure, I think, to switch quickly to kind of ISO native. Whereas, if they've got small volumes, it's not their main market, then maybe those alternative solutions are really a much better use of cash as well. To just put in translation and deal with it because the volumes are small. So it really does come to the size of the market, and the importance it plays in the bank's overall kind of game.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I was thinking, so we thought about in your opening examples, Mike, from some of your specific history about the journey towards that BRICS-based SEPA implementation in the end. Two thoughts. One is, in this analogy of the three little pigs, who or what is the wolf? That's my first question. I've got a second question for you. Who's the wolf? Is that the regulator, or is that just the sheer challenge, the complexity of the different things that will buffet the bank?
You know what? I don't think it's. I think it's unfair to say it's the regulator, but I think it's change. It's the constant pace of change and growing expectations. And if anything, that change is driven by innovation in the market, particularly from the fintech market, I guess, as people are looking to take out what they see as inefficient legacy systems and finding better ways to do it. So change is what's really driving this. It's not so much just regulators or SWIFT. It's a response to change in the market and expectations driven by the ability to leverage technology, which is great. And it's great for the consumer, not so great sometimes for the banks having to deal with it. But the market, honestly, is driving this. So maybe the big bad wolf is the market.
For me, the big bad wolf also has a system when we think about the actual implementation, and that will be the interpretation of the CBPR plus guidelines. So again, and there's also a bit of an experience from SEPA. When we implemented SEPA in a Belgian bank where I was working, we truly followed the SEPA implementation guidelines, and we truly thought that was the rule book that we had to honor, both for inbound and outbound payments. What we in fact saw was that a lot of banks, and that will just at the massive change that we're going to see now with a lot of banks, that they will also interpret the CBPR guidelines in a kind of a different way. They will use the messages in a different way. They will, for example, include characters that you wouldn't expect and so on. So that is also something where banks will really need to think about in all the type of solutions that they're building. How do I ensure that I, first of all, don't create any friction for the messages that I send out to the other banks? So, and I think there the answer is CBPR+. But for incoming messages, they also need to be prepared for variations, and therefore the designs needs also to be flexible enough. Otherwise, they will have operational impact or create friction to their customers and correspondents.
Right, and that friction point's a really good one, because what does friction mean? Friction means cost, right? It costs. Yep. It costs your customers time; they get frustrated. It costs your operations teams time, which costs money, and it costs in terms of the system flows and the challenges. If you don't do this right, friction in the system, it costs you money. Just thinking back briefly, Mike, just a quick one. Your journey through the sticks, the straw that sticks to the bricks. That's an expensive way to do it, right? Because some of our viewers might be thinking, well, we'll start off with the easy one. We'll go for straw to start. But in the end, and you're spending 3 times over?
Yeah, and absolutely. I think that's a really important point. And in fact, we have the same view for all regulatory change. Certainly the Red Compass Labs view, I guess, is, if you've got to do something, then do something that gives you some future benefit. So as you're making your tactical changes, if compliance is that first target, because obviously you have to comply in the first instance, then think through exactly how you can put down longer term foundations that really help you to minimize future investment and smooth your future delivery roadmap, because that's really key. And the bottom line here is find ways to spend smarter. We do that when we look at our ISO fast start. What is the optimal roadmap that reduces total cost of ownership and returns the most value for the organization as we go through the journey? You have to find that balance.
Yeah, exactly. Good one. Okay, we've got just a couple of minutes left. I just wanted to think a little bit about that point you've just made about do what you do in the short term, but think about it such that it gives you the benefit in the longer term. And there's a full end-to-end impact that we need to be thinking about here all the time. Avoid that multiple spend once and get the benefit multiple times. But Frederick, if I could just come back to you from your experience, how do you look at that? How do you look at that planning cycle, and maybe in some of the work that you've been involved in, the short term versus the longer term? How do you set that up, and what tools and tricks can you use to make sure you've got the best visibility of what's coming your way?
Yeah. So as I kind of also said already, I think for me, it's deep understanding of your payments landscape is rule number 1. So you truly need to understand what is happening, and you need to see all the variations from the start, because otherwise you're going to potentially create a limited tactical solution, which is not fit for purpose, which at the end of the day will put you in a bad shape, and which potentially will then mean that you then need to catch up when you then need to build a more strategic solution. For me, second one is proactively reaching out, truly understand what will happen in the market, truly understand what your correspondents will do, what type of things that they will expect from you, because again, this will have an impact on the final design that you choose. And then the last bit is internal and external communication. You're gonna, of course, this is a payments kind of program, but it's touching on so many divisions that you also probably will need to understand how you will impact them if you go for a specific solution. So also that communication with the internal departments is extremely important, just to make sure that you find your right solution.
Right. Thank you, Frederick. Mike, in the last minute, any closing thoughts, comments? 3 Little Pigs might have even been your idea. Any closing thoughts?
Well, I think we've kind of covered this. The key comes back to the holistic planning. Think long term and think about each step along the way. And what is that is that really adding value? And every penny that you spend, can you justify it in the long term? Because the reality is it's going to cost a lot of money to do this. And at the end of the day, you've got to explain to your board or whoever why the money's been spent, and to be able to show the entire journey and how you're adding value as you go is very, very important. Don't throw anything away, right? We're in a culture where we're trying to save the planet. We're trying to save the planet. We have to reuse, recycle. And the same applies when you're building payment platforms.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Frederick, for joining us today. Thank you to those of you watching, whether that's LinkedIn or YouTube or watching later in the day. We thank you for your participation. You can find this episode and the other two in the series on our website at any point, and it'll be there available for you. And we'll be back at the same time, same place next Thursday for number 4 in our series in Lost in ISO 2002 translation. So thank you for joining us today, and good luck. If you would like to speak to us about any of the things we've discussed and how we might be able to help get some of those insights to position you for your own fast starts to get in the right shape quickly with your ISO migrations, please reach out. Thank you for your time. Have a good day.